All right, and we're back with number 13. This is on the second page of your absolute value. So this one is written as 5 minus 8 times the absolute value of negative 2n equals negative 75. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start solving this to isolate. We basically want to isolate the absolute value symbol. So if we think of this absolute value, if you think about like when we solve for x, or we solve for y, or we solve for a, or we solve for b, excuse me, you're trying to get that variable on one side of the equation with everything else on the other side. In this case, we are trying to get the absolute value. Anything that's inside of the absolute value symbol, that needs to be alone on one side, while everything else is on the other side. So how do we do that? Well, the right side, it already has just one number. The left side is what we need to look at here. My order of operations say to take this, 5 minus 8, this 8 times the absolute value of negative 2n. That would be what you do first. So be careful here. I think the most common mistake that would happen here is that people might take 5 minus 8 first and then try to multiply it by negative 2n. And that is not indeed what needs to happen here. So we want to start moving things away from the absolute value of negative 2n. The first thing that we want to do is we want to get rid of the 5 that's here. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, we are going to be left with negative 8 times the absolute value of negative 2n. And then negative 75 and negative 5 is going to give me negative 80. All right, so I treat this like multiplication. So anytime you have something in brackets or you have something in an absolute value, something that has been kind of isolated. If it was a square root, right, we multiply. If there's a number on the outside, the operation would be multiplication, but that's not what we're going to do right now. We can't really do that right now because we have to take care of what's inside of the absolute value first before we can actually multiply by negative 8. So what I need to do is I need to get the negative 8 away from the absolute value of negative 2n. If this was an x, if the absolute value of negative 2n was like x, all we would do is we would divide. The operation happening here is multiplication, so we want to divide this whole side by negative 8. And what happens is this reduces out to 1. Whatever I do to one side, I need to do to the other. So that's going to be negative 8 over here. Once we do that, we now have a situation where the absolute value of negative 2n is now isolated on one side, and then my negative 80 divided by negative 8 is going to give me a positive 10. And this is where I'm kind of breathing a sigh of relief, because if this answer would have been negative when everything was said and done, once the absolute value was isolated, there's no situation where something in the absolute value symbol will give you a negative result. So if this answer would have been negative, notice it was negative kind of all the way down until the last step. If it would have remained negative, you'd be dealing with a no solutions, but it did change to positive, so we are good to follow the same procedure that we did in the earlier examples. Now that that absolute value is isolated, we can now think to ourselves, the negative 2n, the expression inside of the absolute value symbol, that is either going to be 10 or negative 10, because the absolute value of 10 is 10, the absolute value of negative 10 is also 10. So let's go ahead and do that. So negative 2n is either equal to 10 or negative 2n is equal to negative 10. Divide both sides by negative 2. I get n equals negative 5 for the one on the left. The one on the right, we get n is equal to positive 5. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is going to be positive 5. If you want to write it like a solution set, you'd have negative 5 and 5. All right, there's 3 examples. Hopefully those will help you out as you go through and solve these.